by the end of the century, there'll be 10 times as many Africans as Europeans.
Are we in very difficult times?
Yes. We are in that situation as a country.
The economic situation has been very challenging.
We must bring down our expenditure.
People need basic services. They need food. They need housing. They're printing money in the US like it's going out of style. It's a time where we really have to kind of like think about how do we protect that value.
Hi there, guys. Welcome to the Sound of Accra podcast season finale. I go by the name of Adrian Daniels. And if this is your first time listening, I just want you to know that this is the show where we speak with top Ghanaian founders, entrepreneurs, and creators from a Ghanaian heritage or interest, with the aim of leaving you with meaningful takeaways that you can apply in your life, business, or career. Just to get some housekeeping out the way, for today's show notes, please head over to thesoundofaccra.com/Kofi Anku. That's KOFIANKU. So that's thesoundofaccra.com/Kofi Anku, KOFIANKU. So today, just as I mentioned, we have Kofi Anku in the studio, and he is a real estate investor. He's also the partner for Ayi Mensah Park and Pokuase Heights. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
And you also do a few things outside of that as well.
That's right.
Kofi, great to have you in the studio. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure.
It's great to be here.
Likewise. I think we had our first conversation last year at the Ghanaian Londoners. I think it was like a autumn-winter event towards the end of the year. So I think I met you there. Mm-hmm. I think you spoke a little bit.
I did.
You did speak a little bit. Yeah, and then
I try and keep it brief.
Yeah, I think it's short and sweet is the best way to do it. And then, of course, I met you again over the summer at Adrian's Move to Ghana event. Once again, another GH Londoners event. Mm-hmm. And then after I spoke, I think you spoke after me. And every time you speak, even though it's quite short, you always have something valuable to say. So, yeah, I just want to say I do appreciate every word that comes out of your mouth.
Well, I hope we don't disappoint today.
I hope I'm not putting too much pressure on you. Okay, so I mean, let's get straight into it. So recently, I know you attended the Ghana Green Building Summit.
Yes.
Right, and essentially, if I'm correct, is this basically based around looking at solutions for green living and
absolutely
construction? Could you tell us a bit
it brings
more about
the whole industry together.
Yeah.
Looking at green construction, green building, from the finance perspective, from the architectural perspective, building materials. Usually when you're thinking about green construction, you're looking at the energy use of the home. Mm-hmm. So how the house powers itself. Yeah. If you're looking at solar or wind, some sort of alternative green energy system, you're also thinking about are you able to insulate the home, either against heat? Obviously, in the UK, it's a different set of issues where you're trying to keep the heat in. Yeah. So it's you're looking at from various perspectives: the material, the green dimensions in the construction process. Mm. Are you using an eco-friendly building material? So there are lots of even from the perspective of the home. Yeah. There are lots of angles to the green story.
Got you. So there's lots of moving parts that you need to consider, especially as a developer or someone that's constructing a home, or even someone that owns a home. You have to look at these different angles in terms of where green materials or green living can be applied, so that you can, have more of a sustainable home or deliver sustainable housing to the end user.
Actually, I was in London during the hottest day on living record.
Oh, yes. You were here?
I was
really?
Here. Yep.
How was that for you?
Well, actually, coming from a crowd.
It's a walk in the park, isn't it?
Wasn't an issue. But it did drive the point home that as business owners, as developers, it's a good idea to be thinking about carbon emission, about our energy use. And of course, just flicking between London, which has a massive carbon footprint.
Oh, yeah.
And a place like Ghana, where even today, a lot of our energy is green. We still have the largest man-made lake, or the second largest man-made lake on the planet. That's powering a huge amount of hydro power, which is green. So our energy uses, our contribution to global warming from an African perspective is already quite low. So when we're thinking about green, it's not just simply carbon emission, it's also how do we save the homeowner some money? Right? Can we insulate the house? So we've put in a UPVC roof for our latest development. And the thinking behind that is that it just drops the temperature. So a lot of middle-income homes have a metal roof, which just pulls in all kinds of heat and radiates it throughout the night. So if you've got a different building material, it doesn't necessarily need to cost more, but it might need to require a bit more thinking in terms of how do we bring this into the country so that we have it when we need it.
Yeah.
From the logistics perspective. But then you've got that enduring value, which isn't necessarily a driver on sales immediately.
Yeah.
But over a period of time, people, they don't necessarily know why, but they're just more comfortable in your home.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. I think it's quite interesting because I think we're now in a day and age where green, sustainable living and green energy is quite trending at the moment. I mean, you've had like I think it's the COP27, those kind of events, and then you've got all this talk about carbon credits and green planes and all of these green stuff coming up. The big push for electric vehicles.
Sure.
I think we're now starting to see we're getting to the day and age where there's going to be a whole ecosystem of green living, and I think it's quite interesting to see how that also plays out in Africa as well, especially where there's so much sunlight. I do remember seeing an interview of you with Vanessa Camby, and she went into one of the homes that you built in Pokuase Heights. We're going to get to Pokuase Heights very soon. And, she started saying once she went inside the property, she was saying, oh, it's so much cooler in there. And that goes back to what you just mentioned, how some of the materials, how that makes an impact in even making the house cooler. Rather than more hotter, like it kind of like removes the heat a little bit.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's one of the, maybe a colonial legacy.
Yeah.
But the cement block that we typically build with, it draws in a lot of heat and then radiates it through the night. So that's one of the things we were looking at. And again, it works on many levels. If you have a solar backup in your home, it's just a lot easier to deal with than having to fuss with a generator. It's loud and a bit dangerous, and if you've got kids who are asthmatic, which I do, you don't really want to be running a generator in the home for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And just the prices are dropping almost every year in terms of what it costs to put in a solar system, small unit with an inverter, battery, a couple panels on the roof, and that's something that we, as developers, we're looking to actually at some point possibly even put together a microgrid.
Okay.
So that you've got a community that can generate all of its own power.
Yeah. That's excellent. And I think this is a good segue to start talking about your projects, so Pokuase Heights and Ayi Mensah Park, because I think both of those projects you've implemented some sort of solar energy, solar packs. So yeah. So
we've got the more middle income housing project, which is Pokuase Heights. We have a backup solar system in every house, so that's part of the package. It's a 2-bedroom house, expandable, $55,000. So I'm really happy that we're able to deliver these green features, even though we're at a lower price point than Ayi Mensah Park, which is more around $200,000.
Yeah.
So with Ayi Mensah Park, it was an option that we could put in a solar roof if you wanted to, and then you would pay an extra fee for that. Okay,
so it's optional, but with Pokuase Heights, it's actually it's inclusive. Nice, very nice. Okay, let's probably talk about Pokuase Heights. Actually, before we get into that, I know, of course, for those that don't really know you and maybe heard your name, maybe through maybe one of the YouTubers like Vanessa Camby, What Am I, etc. I don't know if it makes sense for you to give a quick elevator pitch about your background, just for those that don't know you, just a really quick one.
Sure.
And then we can come back into Pokuase Heights.
So I've been living and working in Ghana for almost 20 years.
Incredible.
And I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
In the Midwest, and spent most of my upbringing in that part of the world. Ended up on the East Coast of New York for university. I've always been involved in real estate in Ghana. So although my family, back when my father's a retired oncologist, but he was always a real estate investor. And my mother was always a real estate investor. So we grew up in the property space, even as kids. Both of my parents managed a portfolio of rental properties in Marco Island. So my father, very much the savvy real estate investor, started buying a lot of property in Ghana in the mid-90s.
Wow.
And it was something that at the time we didn't really understand the vision and the potential upside and the potential. So it took a while, but with time you saw the growth. And even now, I was leaving Ghana about a month ago, and I was the economic situation has been very challenging, to say the least. I think one of the worst performing currencies globally. Yeah. And but I still left heartened by the direction the country is going, regardless of some of the economic indices. That we've got such a young population and so much opportunity. And we're also connecting in, particularly, that's why I'm really excited about the show, with these nodes, these diaspora nodes, that we've got these groups of Ghanaians and African diaspora in literally the wealthiest countries in the world. And they're linking up. So it's Accra, it's the Caribbean, it's Black Americans and Ghanaian Americans and Nigerian Americans that are excited about Accra. They're bringing money into the space. So, the economic situation is also quite bleak in the UK. Yeah. And there are significant challenges in the States. But when I just look at the fundamentals, the amount of creativity, the age of the population, the dynamism, and the direction that West Africa is going, I can't help but be optimistic.
You should. I mean, you shared an article on LinkedIn, I think it's from The Guardian, on like how Africa's essentially going to be the future. Like Africa's shaping up to be that continent that everyone's going to race to. And I think we can start to see that, especially when you mention that the youngest population in the world is based in the continent of Africa. And I think the human capital, just the potential of those people on the continent, it's just unbelievable. I think there's so much potential we're yet to tap into, especially when when we see the years play out, we can see what they're going to be able to achieve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always just kind of stunned by this. So if you look at the population dynamics, Europe and Africa, 1950, you had twice as many people in Europe as on the whole continent of Africa.
Wow.
By the end of the century, there'll be 10 times as many Africans as Europeans.
Why do you think that is?
There are a whole host of reasons. One, just the access to medicine. And also, I think here, people are just doing the math and having more than one kid. It's such a difficult proposition.
Yeah.
And you've got a country that's built. It's a developed country. Adding value is very challenging. Finding places to invest and get a healthy return, very hard in this part of the world at this point.
I think you're right, because in Ghana you can probably, if you bought a property and you rented it out, especially if it's maybe a 1-bed, 2-bed in Accra, you could probably get returns maybe minimum, maybe 12%, if I'm correct, 12% upwards.
Sure, and I think the more compelling case is that I remember when Ayi Mensah had a 1-lane road in front of it.
What, sorry?
A 1-lane, like a 2-lane road, a very small, dusty road, this little mango farm. Yeah. Now you've got 200 units, townhouses, all sold.
Yeah.
But you're not going to have that here. When I go back to Upper West Side of Manhattan, it looked when I left it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There's no place in Ghana where you can say that. Yeah. And it's just densifying, and there are more people. So people need basic services. They need food. They need housing. They need manufacturing. Yeah. And I think, post-COVID, with the economic turmoil, there's a push towards regionalism, a step away from globalism. Where we're saying we cannot be reliant on food producers in Thailand to feed our families here, or somebody producing face masks in Beijing for the whole continent of Europe.
Yeah.
So that creates opportunities for us.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And I think Ghana, I mean, there's so much we're blessed with, and there's so many industries and potential industries that could be existing in Ghana. I mean, from agriculture to maybe manufacturing. Understand? I mean, I've seen so many amazing inventions and amazing industries in the country.
And culture.
Yeah. I mean, you have a little vegetable, is it greenhouse vegetable?
Yeah, we do. We're looking at indoor farming as well. I've got a tomato greenhouse that's about 4 times the size of an Olympic swimming pool.
Whoa.
So we're producing around the year, which is good because typically tomatoes, so West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria were the largest consumers per capita of tomato-based products. We're importing tin tomatoes.
Doesn't make sense, does it?
It's wild.
Does not make sense.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
But we're talking about opportunities, and for you can see the success of West African music globally, and also art, in the visual art space, fine arts. The opportunities for film are endless. I think our ability to innovate. If you look at global culture and the contributions that Africans and folks from the African diaspora have made, that oftentimes not in a way that's economically empowering, but I think that's beginning to change in very significant ways.
Absolutely. I think now Africans, thanks to technology and other infrastructure and other things, is now enabling them to be able to take control of their financial freedom through different developments that we're seeing. So, for example, I interviewed a gospel artist, Kingsley Amplefor, last season. And he was telling me that although he gets a lot of attention, he gets invited to perform in lots of different places. When it comes to the music online that he has, he struggles to monetize it as a Ghanaian. And he was saying platforms like Patreon and other platforms out there now helping to bridge the gap between the native Ghanaian living in Ghana and of course the West and the tools, opportunities that they have over there. I think you made a very, very good point. I mean, that's why probably in Ghana, you couldn't have, maybe you couldn't really do well in terms of movies because at the moment, you don't have hundreds and hundreds of cinema chains like you do have in the West, in the US or the UK. But what we can do now is that we have Netflix and Amazon Prime Video where the filmmaking can try and get the film onto those platforms and try and make money that way. So I think the
absolutely. There's going to be a point when there'll be 5 million people in India who are watching films that are being produced in Kumasi.
Looking forward to that.
And we've seen it. You saw it with hip hop.
Yeah.
It was in the back culturally. It was in the backwaters in the Bronx. Now it's everywhere. Seoul, Korea, Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So the ability to project and monetize elements of culture and to create intellectual property and real estate. There are people who are saying, listen, we don't like the direction that politics are heading in certain parts of the world, in the West, in France, and Europe. We want to own a bit of Africa.
Absolutely.
We're African people. Whether you're Black American or Jamaican, everybody wants that visceral connection to the motherland.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the issues is around affordability. Buying a home in Ghana is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And the credit facilities typically aren't there. But we have to think creatively about how to address this type of situation.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Pokuase Heights. Let's double tap on there, Kofi. So, of course, Pokuase is on the outskirts of Accra. I used to live there. I grew up there as a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I grew up there as a kid. My family built a home there, and I used to attend Morning Star, so I used to kind of commute from there. So over the years, I've seen Pokuase go from being almost nothing, just land and bushes and trees and a few things here and there, to being almost a complete vibrant town. And then you got the interchange project as well, which I think is going to connect the dots for a lot of people in the area. So, I mean, tell me why do you think Pokuase is going to do well in the future, and why did you choose Pokuase for your next project?
Well, my father, he had that vision. He bought land there 20 years ago.
Wonderful.
25 years ago. And at the time, it was a corn farm. like you said, people just growing sugarcane. I remember folks hunting, they're hunting deer and all kinds of things. And it was just a kind of interesting, lovely, lush environment. And I think he was attracted just by the landscape. We had no idea that a $70 million interchange was in the works. So I think oftentimes when people talk about their success, there's some sort of grand narrative and they had everything planned to a T. But sometimes you just get lucky. And also sometimes it's multi-generational.
It is.
That it's a lot of folks, they hear my accent, they see some buildings and they think, oh, I must have arrived in Accra, 2 years ago, and then this came out of nowhere. But it's really been a huge amount of influence from both of my parents. And, the access to the land to put together Pokuase Heights. So that was, and for us, it's not difficult to build something and pitch it at the highest point in the market. But I've always been interested in saying, okay, well, how do we leverage this asset, this land that we have access to try and do something more impactful and create a real estate product that's not just a big home on half an acre, but creates a community where people can leverage the fact that they've got neighbors to help assist with security, maybe to defray the costs of certain infrastructure, which is what we did at Ayi Mensah Park. We increased the densities. So typically, if you saw before we entered that space, you had a lot of kind of bungalows on little plots. Said, okay, look, we could actually double or triple the densities. We've got 200 houses on 12 acres.
Yeah.
But instead of everybody having a large backyard, we put in a big park in the middle. So, okay, look, we don't have a huge amount of road here, but let's increase the densities and give people a better road than they're used to getting. Right? And we're doing the same thing at a lower price point at Pokuase Heights.
Yeah.
So it's a similar philosophy. How do we do more with less? How do we provide more value for buyers? How do we create something like I lived in Pokuase. I lived in Ayi Mensah Park for about a year with the family. I would be very happy to live in Pokuase Heights as well.
Yeah.
So we try and pitch it to a certain standard of quality and not say, okay, look, just because the house is $55,000 doesn't mean the tile work needs to be poor. All the walls can be straight. We can still create a lot of value just in the craftsmanship.
Yeah.
So these are just kind of a few touches. And again, it's literally the same distance. I think it's 23 kilometers from the airport, both Ayi Mensah Park.
Either way.
And yes.
Wow. So Ayi Mensah Park, what direction in Accra are you going towards?
So you're heading to Aburi.
Oh, I got
so it's a straight shot.
Yeah.
You may get stuck in that Medina traffic.
Yeah,
but that's a pretty straight shot. And then, with Pokuase, you're just, you swing through Achimota.
Yeah.
There's a lovely mall.
Achimota Mall, yeah.
So and then you're also, some of our buyers as well, to them, they like that access to Kumasi because you're literally on the highway that gets you into Kumasi. So if you're somebody that spends their weekends in Kumasi, you can get a jump on traffic.
Yeah. So all of this infrastructure that we've just discussed that's been put in place, has that influenced you to choose Pokuase as your next project? Because you've started to see the bridge, the roads come into place. Now, things are getting a lot more expensive in Accra, especially property.
Sure.
Maybe the diaspora or maybe others are coming to the country and driving property prices up. So people are looking outside.
Sure.
Are those some factors that, influence you to decide, okay, let me use this land for my next project and make it an affordable product that can appeal to a lot more people?
Absolutely. So, I try and shy away from the word affordable because the question is always affordable to whom?
It's relative.
Right? And even when we were selling houses at $45,000, 90% of our buyers were diasporians.
Yeah.
And what we found was it wasn't so much that, obviously there are plenty of Ghanaians who can spend $50,000 in a house.
Yeah.
But they weren't, a lot of Ghanaians who live in Ghana, their tastes are a bit different than the diasporians. Right? And they also have a higher tolerance for buying land because they know that they can visit it and they can secure it by building over a period of time. Whereas if you're sitting in New York, you've had bad experiences buying land remotely. trying to build and getting people to manage the construction for you. So us as developers, we're servicing a very small segment of the market. And it's probably less than 2% of the market that's buying developer-driven product. Most people are sorting out their housing needs on their own.
As in they're buying land themselves and building it themselves, or they're renting.
Yeah, or you might get a contractor to build for you, or, But in terms of developers where you're like, we're doing, we basically do groups of 50 units. So we've got like 12 units, then another 12, and then another 24 under construction. But
at the moment, you've got 20. Nice, okay.
But most folks that live in homes in Ghana, they're not living in those type of developments. They'll buy a quarter of an acre and build and wall it, and it's also a hedge against inflation, right? So essentially, you can use a currency as a store of value, and you can also use it as a medium of exchange. But when you see significant depreciation, and it's the same in the UK as it is here.
Principles apply, universal. Aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the velocity of inflation is higher. But if you look and look at a house that was bought in the States 50 years ago, and you look at the value of the house, and you look at the value of the money, I mean, the money that if you had kept that cash, as opposed to and put it in a bank or a vault, it would have lost 95% of its value.
Absolutely.
Right? They're printing money in the US like it's going out of style. We saw some other thing in the UK.
Quantitative easing.
Yeah, right? So it's a time where we really have to kind of like think about how do we protect that value. I had an uncle who got his pension in Ghana recently, and literally in the space of 6 months, somebody who's worked his whole life, and 50% of the value of that pension disappeared.
Wow.
As the CD has lost 50% of its value. So imagine having worked 6 years, you go to redeem, what is accrued to you, and half it's gone.
So you're saying take your money and put it into an asset that can appreciate in value rather than just letting it be idle.
Well, we know what governments do, and I think that was the move towards Bitcoin, is to try and create an apolitical money where they couldn't print it in the central banks, but obviously there are challenges with that as well. Probably for another podcast.
Yes.
Right? But like you can see the instinct is there where people say, okay, look, we understand cash as a medium of exchange, but as a store of value, we're concerned. Right? Because we just don't have autonomy over it, and it can lose its value.
Yeah.
So I think that there are many ways of approaching it. There's a debt fund out of California, and I'm been fascinated with what they're doing, because what they're doing, they're buying housing contracts on the continent, right? I think most of their work has been in Guinea, and it's a fascinating model. So it's basically an end run around the banks, right? Where they're saying, okay, well, listen, we believe in this diaspora story, that you've got Africans who are desperate to own homes on the continent, and the banks aren't giving them credit. So we'll take on that risk.
Wow. So what they're now giving out loans so that people...
It's fascinating. So it's not a mortgage.
Okay.
Right? So because they finance the developer.
Oh.
So what they do is, if you buy a house from me, you give me the deposit. I sell that contract to the debt fund. They pay me, and then as you're making your monthly payments, I'm satisfying that debt.
Wow.
Right? So they don't have to get they're not regulated by the same kind of mortgage laws, because they're financing the developer and allowing the developer to extend better payment terms.
That's quite creative.
Very creative.
Nice,
but it's even more interesting because you've got this debt fund, right? So they're offering the debt at 12%, but they're also giving 9% to their investors.
Oh.
Right? So imagine you've got folks that are sitting in Accra, they're watching their currency, the value of their currency to deteriorate before their eyes. What if they were able to invest in a fund that was buying these housing contracts with full transparency? Like you can see, there's the house, it's sitting right there. How many houses? Audited by KPMG. Like you can see where this could possibly go, right? So it's now you're buying T-bills, but you really don't know what the Ministry of Finance is doing, right? They're floating these bonds, they're borrowing, they can't pay some of these debts, then they get caught out, then what's the value of T-bill, what's the value of the currency? How do you hedge against that? Right? Nothing wrong with having a diversified portfolio. Buying some T-bills in different jurisdictions, great, if you've got the money to do that. Right? But I think that there's real estate offers, most banks are rooted in real estate. Right? If you get a loan, if you dig deep enough, there's some asset that's been collateralized to secure the loan at some level. Right? But they're basically these trust institutions. And either you trust the guy that's giving you the banking license, or you don't. And I think that we're in a period where people are more distrustful of government. Right? So they're looking for things that they can invest in and feel like, well, we're concerned about the dollar, or we're concerned about the pound, we're concerned about the CD, right? But you can just kind of draw a box around it and feel like you've got something that's harder to, if I can print the money in my basement, right? Like you can't do that with a house. Right? It's much more difficult to confiscate property from somebody. It's not that it can't be done. It's happened in our history.
Yeah.
But like at least now you've got a constitutional protection against that. And we've been a democracy for long enough that people have that confidence that, okay, listen, if I buy a house and the title's good, I own it. And the value that's going to accrue to it as it appreciates, I can use that in various ways.
Honam Naturals Organic Vegan Skincare. An advanced botanical blend. Regenerate your skin with long-lasting moisture. Shop now at honamnaturals.com.
Tell me, Kofi, about how the Ghanaian economy. I think this is a good place to quickly, park it at the state of the Ghanaian economy. I've done a few episodes talking about it. I think right now we're in a place where I think it's £1 to 17.5 cedis, which is ridiculous. I'm not sure what the dollar exchange rate is for those that are listening from America, but also rising inflation. It's impacting the cost of goods, commodities, and
we're seeing it in the real estate business from the developer and contracting side. It's wild. We literally will get an invoice that's valid for 24 hours, 48 hours.
Wow.
Because people just don't know how to price goods. So, we really have to stay on our toes and think about how to purchase. There's a post that we did recently that people responded well to because a lot of our vendors are local manufacturers. And that gives us a bit more freedom. But again, it's difficult to know who the good guys are, but we've got enough of a track record in the industry to know that, okay, we can deal with these guys and we're going to get a great quality product. So from the insulated wall panels that we're using, to the roofing trusses, there's a company called Doma that produces that. Ash Foam has done an incredible job with our kitchens and wardrobes. They've also furnished the model unit. And I didn't even know that they produce their own furniture. They've got really nice furniture. So it's nice to be able to not have to try and import, with hard currency items from China and look for local alternatives. We've got even a locally produced ceramic tile that's fantastic that we're using in the houses. So the economy, it's challenging, but we have to contextualize it. Right? The economy of Ghana is tiny. Like literally the size of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There are probably people who've watched your show whose net worth could pay off our debt. Like it's wild, right? So the amount of productivity that's required, the amount of creativity that's required for us to take a significant step forward, I think is not insurmountable.
What does that mean?
I mean that this is something that we can sort out. Right? It's a question of having an organized approach, and leveraging both the opportunities in the country and the access to resources and markets that sit in the diaspora.
Okay, so having like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, how do you benefit from the arbitrage? Right? There are differences in these economies. We were just talking about this podcast, and you've got your cousin who's a top editor. How difficult would it be to train editors in Ghana who could do what he does, maybe 85% to the quality level, but then provide that as a service to all of Western Europe?
Absolutely. I think this is happening. I mean, my previous guest, Samuel Brooksworth, remotely.
Yep.
Africa's fastest growing virtual assistance company.
Yeah.
So he's one person that's going into that market.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. He actually contacted me on LinkedIn.
Nice.
Before he started the business.
Yeah.
And he was like, the question was quite simple. He's like, look, I'm considering making a move to Ghana. I said, listen, brother, the market is there. There's opportunities here, but you have to link it back.
Absolutely.
Outsourcing. And I think what he's done is incredible.
And it's so many he's done a fantastic job, honestly. And he's now looking to expand to other countries, which is brilliant. And I think the fantastic thing here is that it hits so many different angles. You're helping to keep money within the economy. You're creating jobs. You're making more profit margin. It ticks so many boxes. So I think we should look at keeping the wealth within the country where possible. Like what you said as well, supporting local or national, designers, creators or providers, manufacturers, etc., so that they can also, be taken care of and we can support them and they can grow, and it just makes this kind of domino effect happen.
Absolutely.
And how's the economy affected people purchasing units from Pokuase Heights, and you as a developer? Of course, it's affected you, but I mean, how has that affected you from the sense of the units that you're selling?
Sure. So from the market perspective, again, a lot of our market is diasporans. So we saw that even during COVID, I think a lot of people's savings grew because they didn't have money, they didn't have opportunity to spend it. So I don't think there's a Ghanaian on the planet who at some level doesn't have an interest in, that might be hyperbole, but there's a home sense that we have, and it's beyond just Ghanaians. Now you've got other West Africans who are buying property in Accra. You've got Black Americans who are very interested in purchasing. I think the hurdle for a lot of Black American potential buyers is that they're used to buying properties with mortgages with low interest rates. So getting their mind around a cash purchase is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, because the mortgages, I think, the lowest rates you could probably get, maybe is it 10, 12%?
In Ghana, if you're at Diaspora, maybe 12, 13.
And it's quite high.
It's quite high, yeah, on the dollar. But what I found is that if you've got the right product, like a $55,000 house, people aren't looking to carry that debt for 15 years, right? It's a car note. $55,000 mortgage is usually $350,000, something like that. But 55 grand, a lot of the professionals in the diaspora, they can pay that off in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So that's what we've actually recently put in a 2-year payment plan.
Wonderful.
Right, and then the plan is we can work with debt funds like the one I described in California and sell that note, just to allow us to speed up the cash flow and build more.
Yeah, because you need cash so you can continue to build and rinse and repeat.
Exactly.
Building.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of view our real estate product almost as an export product, right? Because this is what it's pulling in hard currency into the economy, and creating employment. That's not usually the driver as an entrepreneur, but we're seeing that as the effect, right? That it's not a scenario where you've got local Ghanaians who are trying to figure out how to purchase these homes. There is an opportunity for that, but I think we also need to find products that's going to appeal to even a broader demographic at the base. I think you've got the Ayi Mensah Park style, 200,000. Pokuase Pokuase Heights coming at 55, it would be lovely to be able to create a product that's somewhere between 25 and 30,000.
Is that your next goal, to do that?
That's always been the goal, but how do you achieve that? Right, so you
Especially in this economy.
Yeah, you've got to take small steps,
Yeah.
and you've got to also figure out what the trade-offs that the market. It's not, the demand curve isn't linear, right? Like you can't just keep making the house smaller and expect someone to buy it. Like you can create a product that people can afford but don't want, and people that want can't afford, right? So there are these pockets of demand. So you've got to fine tune it.
Yeah.
And we kind of, at one point, we decided, okay, let's up the quality a little bit at Pokuase Heights, make the unit a little bigger, right? And it costs a little bit more, but buyers wanted that level of quality and were prepared to pay a little bit more for that. So it's I think as we scale and we attract more favorable financing, it's interesting that like neither administrations, we've never got a call from either governments to say, okay, well, listen, we're interested in what you're doing. How do we help you scale it, or what lessons do you have for us? Right, like that conversation never happens.
Why do you think that is?
That's a fascinating question. We probably need a whole podcast to
There's
talk
a whole
about
podcast
that
on it.
as well.
Yeah.
But
you don't want to get into politics too much. There's other people talking about that.
I mean, I think there's a space for the private sector to operate. We're kind of on separate tracks. They just kind of seem to do their own deals.
Yeah,
and I've seen the affordable housing deals from the last 4 administrations. They've got different visions, different priorities, but there's definitely a huge political entrepreneurship push where folks that are related to government or in government have influence and are able to kind of warp gravity towards projects that often aren't sustainable. And I don't know how familiar you are with some of these projects, but a lot of them have consumed huge amounts of capital but have delivered very little.
Yeah, and I know there's a whole bunch of developments that are uncompleted, just lying around as well. It's a waste. And
heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. And I'm sure you as a developer, you're just thinking, I could have been more economical about this.
My brother, I'm telling you, the amount of money they spent on consultants, I could have finished the development. No, I mean, forget the capital for the construction. I'm telling you, just the arranging and the consultants and it's, but you can see that across the board, and it's not unique to our government. It's, I'm sure there's similar amount of waste in, pick a continent.
Yeah. I mean, it's
kind of the nature of the beast, I suppose.
Again, there's a whole podcast that we could talk about just the missed opportunities of where the government could have collaborated better with entrepreneurs and other stakeholders to help the country be a bit more prosperous. I mean, the year of return is one example. I mean, I could be here all day, just talking about all the different missed opportunities that they could have taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so you say 90% of your of customers come from diaspora. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular personas that are attracted to Pokuase Heights, for instance?
It's a mix.
It's a mixture.
Yeah, different age groups. Mm-hmm. Folks from the States, folks from the UK.
Mm-hmm. And you must
families. Yeah. Young professionals, single people. It's quite a mix.
Yeah. So it must be very useful data for you as well, because you could take all of this data and you could kind of look at it and just have a look at the numbers and say, okay, cool, for my next project, I probably want the house to be, but this price point, it has to look like this. It can be targeted at this kind of person, that kind of person, that kind of person. So it must be very interesting, all the inquiries and the inbounds and all of the people.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think
from a data perspective,
from the data perspective, and there's trial and error in this industry. I think it's true in every industry, and nobody likes to make mistakes, but that's really how you get better.
Yeah,
right. As you make mistakes, it's trial and error, and then you listen to the feedback.
Yeah. Right.
So that's typically been the MO for us. We've got ideas as engineers, as designers, as developers, and then we've got contact with the market, and they have other ideas. So sometimes you can bring them around to your thinking, and other times you need to just change the product so you're meeting the demand. So it's a fascinating dance, and it's nice when you actually have the wisdom of experience to fall back on, because it allows you to be more improvisational.
Yeah,
because you've got all this feedback that's accrued for years.
Yeah,
and so it's an exciting time to be in the industry, and I think to be in Ghana.
Sure.
Just because there's a growing Black consciousness around not just political sovereignty, but also economic empowerment.
A lot more people, let's say, from the UK, the US, with celebrities or just normal regular diaspora coming in and investing, wanting to move, wanting to set things up. And like what you said, some people are setting things up, putting some systems in place, and then going back to their countries and then just creating jobs, but they're still abroad, and
Sure.
then they're benefiting from the startups or the business that they set up on the ground in the country, which is brilliant. I want to go back onto discussing your projects. So one thing that I've noticed from both of your projects is they've had quite a focus on the communal aspect.
Sure.
So like you talked about in Ayi Mensah Park, you got they've got the clubhouse, you got maybe the basketball court. It's the shared amenities. And similar thing for Pokuase Heights. I think that maybe you have there's common place for access to water and things like that.
Sure. Actually, the groundwater in Pokuase is excellent because you're far enough away from Accra and the sea that it's not salty.
Yeah.
But so for us, it just made sense. We put in a few boreholes, and then you've got a community water distribution. Yeah. And it saves people money. There's no reason for each house to have its own water tank.
Yeah.
To me, we've got to find ways to collaborate. We've got to find ways to live together, and it's more efficient. So security the same way. Like my thinking is, okay, let's secure the perimeter for 12 homes and then you're paying a gate man for 12 homes as opposed to one for each house. So these kinds of interventions, shall we say.
It's more smarter thinking, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah. And yeah, so the point I'm trying to get to is what we're starting to see this kind of communal living kind of patterns, not even just the projects that you've done, but I mean across the city,
sure,
and across the world. I mean, like for example, I've seen the Cantonment City projects when I went to the Ghana Property Expo, seeing what they're trying to do with the kind of work, play, live theme. And then you've got Petronia City that Freedom Jacobs and Nana Kwame Bediako's working on. He wants to do something similar, but maybe on a massive scale. And then you see in other African countries, they have similar kind of projects going on where there's this common living, you could call it smart cities as well in the future, where you're going to have all of these different amenities kind of working together in the ecosystem, which is going to benefit everyone and be more efficient on a resource perspective. So my question is, where do you see like the future of like Ghana and Africa in terms of how developments are going to be and how we're all going to live? Are we going to be living more kind of like, is there going to be more of this communal co-living thing going on, or are we still going to want to build our own houses and live in our own areas, etc., and be a bit more isolated?
It's a great question. I'm a huge fan of cities. As somebody who spent a lot of time in New York City, I was in university there and spent a good amount of time in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I love the culture. I love the fact that you're coming in contact with lots of different types of people from all over the world. Just the velocity of interactions, right? The type of people, the different types of people coming up against each other. It's energizing, it's invigorating. It allows for new ideas to be born and created and shared and dispersed that you just can't quite get in a more suburban vibe arrangement. So I think the cities will endure. You're going to find more and more people attracted to cities. There's going to be more economic opportunities. What will be interesting to see is the impact of the digital revolution. we also found that in COVID, a lot of people could do a heck of a lot of work from home. So I was thinking about Samuel's company, right? And I actually had a friend who was working with actually about 15 years ago, parking tickets or municipal tickets in New York City were processed in Accra. A company called DMI. And what they would do, so if say you had some trash in front of your house, and they wrote you up, right? So there would be some beat cop who would scribble on a piece of paper. All of those tickets would get collected, scanned, sent to Ghana, and they would have to just decipher what that cop had written. So I think there's probably a double entry system where you had two people try and make sense of it, and if they came up with the same conclusion, then it would be green lighted, and you'd end up with that, that write up and that citation. Right. So that was 15 years ago. Another buddy of mine who's in the Philippines was running a similar institution. Kind of off the back of that, and they were looking at data processing and outsourcing. The challenge was that the commercial real estate in Ghana was more expensive than it was, say, in India or in the Philippines. What was good was that it was on similar time zones, right? So you had an overlap in your day. Exactly. If you're doing something for the UK, you're outsourcing to Ghana, it makes a lot of sense. But the challenge was the electricity was more expensive in Accra. Nobody made any computers on the continent, so everything was imported. So your desktops were more expensive. Your labor may have been cheaper than parts of Asia, but maybe not as productive. So when they were doing the math, it didn't quite work. But I think we're at a stage, but that was before everybody's walking around with a smartphone. And so the question that I've been thinking about is like, how do we mobilize a lot of very sharp, well-educated Ghanaians of various age groups so that they could do work and be paid off their phones? They don't necessarily need to be in an office. They don't necessarily need to commute. And that was one of the issues with these employees. So you've got, in India, they've got these massive setups where they've got dormitories and everything's kind of set up for digital workers or outsourcers. But in Ghana, my Filipino friend who was running that business, he would have a key worker would come up and say, "Hey, listen, I need a 2-year rent advance." Right? Like, how do you manage that as an employer? Right? But can we find ways to mobilize Ghanaian youth who are sharp and find ways that they can use their brains on their smartphones? Right? Like, everybody knows about the Sakawa boys, and like that. Those things can go good or bad. Right? You can use it for some scam, credit card scam, but you can also create a whole business on the back of that creativity.
Can be used for good or bad, basically.
Yeah, and we've just got to find, as entrepreneurs, particularly folks like us who have the perspective. If you've never left Dansoman, you're not necessarily going to know what the opportunities are in London. And I think just as we go back and forth, we're able to see those opportunities.
And with these opportunities, I know, for example, cryptocurrency was one of the opportunities that people looked into during the lockdowns in Ghana. But I think just going back to this whole theme of like development, real estate, and kind of like sustainable living, etc. So because of this whole work remote revolution that started, people can now probably start to look outside Accra, for example, and they can start to maybe look to live outside if they're plugged into remote working and opportunities to make money online.
Absolutely, yeah. Digital nomads. You can live in Aburi as far as you've got internet connection, and you can edit and write and hop on a Zoom call from time to time.
Yeah, and do you think this will then push demand for property outside of Accra as well?
I think given the population dynamics, there's going to be demand everywhere. Like, when I sit back and I look at the market, there's huge demand in every segment.
True.
And the developers were not able to meet the needs of the market at this point.
We're not able to meet the needs.
We're not able to meet those needs yet. I mean, if you look at something like Ayi Mensah Park, there's not a city in Africa that couldn't use 10.
I couldn't use
10 of similar developments. The whole continent. And I've been popping around to a few different countries.
Yeah.
And there's a need for that.
So what you're saying is always going to be a demand for all of these different products.
Yeah.
And that's where the opportunity is, and that's where there's always going to be some kind of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed this conversation, Kofi. Just want to kind of move on to just the final bit to this conversation. So I'm sure people have approached you as they've been buying from you as maybe a gateway into Ghana. So you, as someone that's been living, working, or having a business for about 10, 20 years, what advice do you tend to give to those who are looking to relocate or move to Ghana, invest in Ghana, also live in Ghana as well?
Sure. So yeah, that's a conversation that comes up often. It's interesting. There's so many ways to approach the country. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's almost a calling. And I think that's usually the driver, that you see an opportunity. There's something that's just not quite right. And you realize that there's some set of resources that you specifically have where you can meet that need. So that's usually, once you have that driver, and you're disciplined, and you can live within your means, you have the patience that's required to succeed over a longer time horizon.
Yeah.
Right? And then if you can find people, like for me, my training is in African American Studies, Literature and History. Right? So I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, but it's allowed me to have the humility to learn from everybody, right? Because I'm not necessarily supposed to know anything. So whether it's economics or finance or banking, I've allowed myself to sit at the feet of various people from various different disciplines and ask lots of questions and assimilate as much of that as I can, try things, and you just keep what works. So I think the rate of change that I find in Accra, there's just huge opportunities for everybody in an array of different fields. So if you're looking to move back, and you've got a foot in the developed world, there are great opportunities for you.
Awesome. And what pitfalls would you share with those who are looking to make those moves that you can share from your years of experience, whether it's investing, living, or relocating?
I think it's important to just take a very humble, and I think there's a conversation around this, that sometimes things aren't quite as easy as they look, that there may be a reason that things aren't happening the way you may expect them. So, it's not as easy as saying, okay, well, there's a gap in the market, and I can pluck this thing that's working in Bristol and plop it into Accra and make millions.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's a reason why there's, that fit might need some adjustment.
Yeah.
So you have to maybe sandbox it and start small. And then, I think it's true probably anywhere in the world. You just want to make sure that you've provisioned the business properly, and you've got some contingency plans if things take longer than you expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be universal principles that you can take if you're moving to a country like Ghana. I mean, you build, and then you build, you test, you iterate, go back to the market, come back, tweak, and then launch, and then improve your version, and hopefully tweak until you get it right. It sounds like that's what you've been doing with some of your projects as well. I mean, seeing what the market wants, trying to make a little fine-tuning tweaks here and there, and then to get that out get back out on the market, and then hopefully make that sell, and then take that knowledge into your next projects.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
Wonderful. I really enjoyed having you here, Kofi.
Adrian,
Do you have
thank
any
you.
announcements that you want to make in terms of, can you still have some units that you're selling? Or?
Yeah, we do. So essentially what we do is we just build in phases.
Okay.
So we'll build phase 1, sell it off, build phase 2, sell it off. We're in the midst of phase 3 now. So I suspect as we're getting ready for Christmas and the whole diasporan tribe descends on Ghana, it shouldn't take us very long to move those. But once those are gone, we'll put some more on the market.
Nice. So it's more or less, would you say it's kind of selling itself at this rate, or is still a little bit of?
Yeah, we have an interesting strategy. So we work with a lot of YouTubers and also on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've just been really...
It's really good LinkedIn, isn't it?
It's wild.
Yeah. Because it's like Facebook in 2014, the organic reach is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when one person comments or likes, then other people in their network see it. And then there's just this network effect that happens.
Absolutely. And just in terms of finding, I've got a network of about 30,000 Ghanaians.
Whoa.
Mostly professionals in the diaspora. And it's I've been building that for the past 4 years. And I've met so many incredible people. And we've just, linked up sometimes like, hey, let's hop in a Zoom and have a chat about something. And then you can find your market. And it's not easy. It's not that difficult to identify a Ghanaian in the diaspora. So, you find the names, you're looking at various cities. So I'll pop up, if I go and visit some friends in Chicago, I've got a network of 600 Ghanaian professionals that I can reach out to and ask, hey, is there an event that I should be attending? And everybody's always so helpful. So I think it's a combination of telling a story on YouTube and then you multiplying that by the network on LinkedIn. That's really been my formula. So, I've tried to take a page out of Elon's book. You never see a Tesla ad.
Yeah.
Right? But he's just kind of like this one-man PR machine.
A personal brand, yeah.
Yeah. And it's, if you see a billboard, that's great. But you walk through a home with Vanessa Camby or with Ivy Prosper.
Yeah.
Right? And you really get a sense of, you can spend 20 minutes and see, okay, how much space is there in this gallery? And you got a sense of how much space there is in the living room, right? And it's more tactile, and so for us to be able to communicate with that level of specificity to a global audience, pinpointing Ghanaians in the diaspora, and again, the Ghanaian, particularly the Ghanaian diaspora in the UK, is massively supportive. A number of associations, the overlap. You see people who run the real estate diaspora community supporting the people who run the kind of more social Ghanaian. So everyone's all linked up, and everybody comes out for each other's events.
Yeah.
And then there's
very supportive.
The nursing association and the doctors and dentists, and everybody's rooting for each other.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a really warm environment.
Yeah.
So I've really felt lucky to be able to build into particularly the London diaspora community, share content, and you're right. People, they share. People who maybe they bought a house, maybe they have no intention of buying a house, but they just think, oh, this is an interesting thing, and so that's allowed me to basically zero out my marketing budget and produce and sell houses cheaper.
Yeah.
So it's the technology has also been an enabler.
Amazing. So it seems like the trick here is in the modern day and age is to build a network or community, and then build trust and familiarity with them, and tell a story or show them whether it's a skill set or something. Let them build trust in you, and then you'll be able to sell a product or service to that specific circle group of people. That tends to be like, I think, a more popular way of doing business these days, especially with the social media, internet, and the content. So it's quite interesting how that's working for you. Very, very interesting. And you mentioned the UK community is quite vibrant and very supportive. I know we're wrapping up now. Just quickly want to ask you before we go. how does the African American community respond to what you're doing? Because, for example, I know there's a few Ghanaian communities in the US, whether it's in New York or I think Ohio, Columbus. I think
Sure, yeah.
I think Kwame Christian, one of my guests, he's from there. He's not Ghanaian, but actually he's surrounded by the Ghanaian community.
Interesting.
Like I think Samuel Badu from Fleury, I think he's part of that. So how does the African American community respond to what you're doing as well?
So when you say African American, you mean the Ghanaian-American community?
The Ghanaian community, the Ghanaian American. That's
sure. Ghanaian-American community. It's hard to call it a community because it's such a massive country, and you also have a lot of Ghanaians who are distributed in places, in little towns and villages and cities that you never even heard of.
Yeah.
So you do have concentrations in New York, in DC, in parts of California, in Texas, Chicago. So, but it's, to get from LA to New York, you may as well be going to London.
Yeah, because it's huge.
Yes.
The country's massive,
4 or 5 hour flight.
Yeah.
Right? So people aren't bumping into each other.
Yeah.
So you don't have that same density. And I think the US, it may be a wealthier diaspora, but it's not quite as tight-knit.
That's the key thing. That's the key differentiator here.
Yep.
Yeah. Kofi, this has been fantastic. Where can everyone find you?
So the best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn, as you know.
Yeah. Okay, just LinkedIn. That's your only call to action. Just check me out on LinkedIn. Sure, no problem. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on the show. So that's it for season 4, guys. We have Mr. Kofi Anku here, real estate investor and the partner over at Ayi Mensah Park and Pokuase Heights. Just to remind you for today's show notes, please head over to thesoundofaccra.com/Kofi Anku. That's KOFIANKU. And on your way out, whether you're watching YouTube or you're listening on the podcast platforms, please like, subscribe, please do share, and leave us a review for listening on Apple or Spotify. And we will catch you on season 5. Thank you so much. Cheers. Thanks.